Right. And that was, I think, Jamie Kelso was doing that at the time.
I
Uh,
believe so, yes.
yeah, well, very good. Well, I credit you with making me active in the movement. I also credit you,
Me?
yes, I
Oh,
also credit you with uh, turning me away from just typical conservatism and becoming a little more radicalized. We met the first time we met. I wanted to get something going with the Pace Amendment, and we had a meeting at I think it was a Hilton Hotel in the San Fernando Valley.
that's
And
right.
you were
Yes.
there, and you were probably 20 years old or younger, um,
19.
19. And I said, look, I've written this book. I want to start doing something. And everyone's going, no, 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 no. And Chris, put his fist on. You've got to do it. Boom, boom, boom. And so you encouraged me to go ahead and do it. So I said, okay, all right. If somebody's so adamant, I'm going to go ahead and do it.
Did I
And
actually tell you that? I don't even remember
yeah,
doing that.
I remember
Oh,
thinking you were the one that told me to move forward on it, and
oh.
um, and so based on that, I have I have dumped hundreds of thousands of dollars of my money and most of my time. I'll be in the loser activities because of you, and then
Oh, thank you.
also also, I was just a gung ho conservative. I'm voting for Richard Nixon because he's going to do that. And you said, hey, no, first of all, uh, democracy stinks. We need to have a monarchy. Right? And all the other things, stuff I'd never heard of. And you said all these other
Wow.
things that were extreme. And I said, oh, okay, that opened my mind. So I've wanted
Oh.
to talk with you over the years. Um, but just to point my finger out and blame you for all of my losses. Um, but, uh, but it was, really, you were very influential early on in getting me to do what I do, and I thank you for it. So tell me about yourself. Are you still like a nurse? Is that what you are?
um,
Oh, should we not talk about your personal stuff?
we should not really talk
Okay, all right.
publicly. I could bring you up to date privately.
Yeah, okay, that's all right. So let me throw everybody off track. Are you still Mitch McConnell's chief of staff? Um,
Yes.
okay, there you go.
I'm an attaché at the Israeli embassy part time.
Okay, all
So,
right,
yeah.
very good, very good. Okay, all right. Well, that's an
Yes.
introduction. So Charles, the monitor, will turn it back over to you.
I'm just astounded that anyone would not think that being Mitch McConnell's chief of staff was not a major issue in defamation. But anyhow, well, I guess I mean after hearing this, what I'd really like to hearing how you all met and what Chris had to say in the beginning, I'd be interested to know update. What does Chris want us to do now? Because let me just explain a little bit about how I know Chris. I know Chris through Facebook, which I'm no longer on. My Facebook profiles. I think we met on Facebook. I don't think it was anything else.
No,
Uh,
it was Facebook.
but Chris, he's not bashful on Facebook at all. He's very out there and saying really dramatic and interesting things. And he argued with me very intelligently about some of the key issues in the movement. I guess we've disagreed more than anything else about the nobility of the South. I mean, as you can tell from some of the things I said last night, for instance, and many other occasions, I'm a real admirer of the Old South and the aristocracy, really, to be perfectly honest about it. And I'm up to a point a defender of slavery and of everything that made the South what it was. And Chris thinks that's a major mistake. Those are wrong. And I want to hear Chris and say face to face what he really wants to have in the movement right now and where he wants us to go. Because I think he's a very bright person with a lot of practical ideas, and I've just been trying to get him get his advice ever since I met him, which is like years ago now.
Uh, I, I would know where to begin. I mean, first of all, we don't really have a movement as such. We have a scene, we have a subculture. It's a very marginal subculture that has very little impact on the larger society. That's the
How do
simple
we create a
reality.
movement? How do we create a movement? How do we get back to where you were telling Bill Johnson, William Daniel Johnson, what to do, and what would you say now?
Well, I'm not sure there are any answers. I hate to say that. And I've never dubbed myself to be any kind of expert or guru or anything like that. I'm very modest about my own abilities or potential. And so I'm flattered that you're asking me for my views on these issues. But God, if I know, I mean, if I knew, if I had the perfect plan or package for success, I would have written a book or run for office myself or something years ago. There's just, it's something deeply embedded in the culture of the United States. It's to create a successful movement on the basis of of your ideals, Daniel Johnson's ideals, mine. It would require going against a lot of things that Americans believe in deeply, like the sovereignty of the individual, the absolute right to the pursuit of happiness and freedom. What do you do if somebody's pursuit of happiness and freedom is hiring illegal aliens, bringing them into the country and putting them to work in order to maximize his or her profits? I mean, there are so many things, but basically, I'll just tell you bluntly, the white population of the United States, a European derived population, is not really a nation. They're not a people in the sense that Poles and Ukrainians and Latvians, the Irish, etc., are ethnicities who are kind of just dispossessed Europeans that were planted over here. And we really, the only identity we did have in common was as Americans, and nobody doubted that the core identity of America was a European derived identity. I mean, everybody accepted that until the last 40 years or so, and then all of a sudden, oh no, we're going beyond that. We're part of this rainbow nation now, that encompasses the world, a universal nation. I think Ben Wattenberg termed it. That's the future for the United States. So to save our people on this continent requires, in many respects, almost the impossible. It requires us to go against Americanism, classic American ideals. And I don't know if that's really possible for most people. I don't think it is, because people are culturally and emotionally connected to those things, and you're asking people to throw that all away, and for what? For a very uncertain identity that may or may not be successful, in the long term. So I really don't know. The only thing I would say is we need to network. We need to create alternative support networks to the establishment, in all areas, socially, economically. That's always been something I wanted to see, but all those efforts have always failed. People have made attempts at them, sometimes seriously, and they've never succeeded. I've been involved in a few of them, and they all failed miserably. So
Yeah, see, Charles, I have bounced around like a pinball with any movement and activity that I think might work. I put my efforts behind, and I've done so many different things. And it's like Christoph said, they've kind of failed. Nothing has sparked the imagination of the people yet, but I'm still hopeful that something can happen. I mean, I started out with the Pace Amendment, and I wrote a book there when I was living in Korea at the time. I wrote the Pace Amendment book, and I tried that for a while, and that didn't go anywhere. And then I toured the country with a Black nationalist promoting back to Africa. This was before the internet, and we didn't get anything but huzzas and what's it called, Bronx cheers. And then I've gone other things. I've joined other parties, run the American Freedom Party. I've done what was called Clean Up America. I sent letters to every lawyer. You got the lawyers list and say, get the lawyers combined together. That didn't work. I was really involved in the Ron Paul movement because I thought Ron Paul might lead us in the right direction. I was heavily involved with Donald Trump, hoping he would do something. And it's kind of, nothing has come together. And then now my latest project is I'm trying to put together a musical that will kind of ease people into our way of thinking, and nothing has worked. But my primum mobile, my main idea is that something will create a spark and will have the effect of saving our people. And I remember that it was the Wikipedia, or it was the Southern Poverty Law Center or something. They had my bio and they said, well, Johnson is a dedicated but uninspiring white nationalist. And so I took that out and I framed it. I didn't frame it, but I was going to frame it. But that's exactly right. I am dedicated and I'm uninspiring. I've not been able to get anything going. And so the Wikipedia or the John, no, what is it, the Southern Poverty Law Center, they're correct in that regard. So I am as at sea as Chris is. I don't know what needs to be done.
Well, what I would say, Daniel, is that if you couldn't do something, and you have been your whole life part of a community that had very strong identitarian values at one time, up until fairly recently, very strong family values, sense of community, and it doesn't seem like you succeeded in converting any fellow LDS to your views.
No, there have been numbers that have come around, but the majority, but Mitt Romney's converted a lot more of them, But yeah. I mean, when I first got married, my wife came from a huge family, and her father was the head of the Mormon church in the East Coast, and he's very important in the church. And the wife was really kind of sympathetic to my views. When I was dating my wife, I mentioned that I was really opposed to all the immigration, and my future wife says, well, Mom, you're an immigrant and your family was immigrants. And she says, well, my family came from Norway. We could fit in, we could adjust. But these people coming in could not. And I thought, if that's what my mother-in-law is going to be, then that's going to be a pretty good idea. But my wife was not on board with me at all. Her 7 brothers and sisters were not on board at all. And now, 40 years later, more than 40 years later, all of her sisters are harder, and my wife too, are harder core than I am. They're approaching Chris in their extremism, and even some of the boys are coming around. So it's happening. But yeah, I mean, the church has tried to. I go to a very wealthy church in Southern California, and the members are just as left as can be, and they got it together to try to get me excommunicated, and they didn't succeed on that. But so there's a lot of opposition, but I do know that in fits and starts, we are making some progress there. And but that aside, I mean, I have a lot of kids, I have grandkids, more grandkids on the way, and they're all white, and they're all Northern European. They're all more or less, 4 of the 5 kids are strongly racially conscious, and the youngest one may come around. So I'm confident that as times get worse, things will get better for our people, because it's like Ron Paul would go around the country, and I would be with him on some of these things, and he would say, there's got to be a remnant. We have a remnant. And he was talking about a remnant. I thought, that's what I think, the remnant of our race and our people. But he had a different view. He's not one of us in that regard. He's a good man, I think. But we may kind of backtrack until we just have a remnant and then build up from there.
So let me ask this of Charles. What do you see in the future, the next couple of decades? Do you see any hope for optimism? And I'm talking specifically about the United States and not Europe or South Africa or any place like that, but here at home in the US.
I'm still looking for the path to. I mean, that's the most optimistic and honest way I can see. I mean, I live in New Orleans. I am surrounded by all sorts of indicators of degeneracy. I am surrounded by racial degeneracy, moral degeneracy, the degeneracy of my own church, and the difficult to understand assault on the things that make New Orleans interesting and that make New Orleans New Orleans. And it's such a depressing scene that I'll ask you to ask Paul. Now, you said that you know Paul. Paul, do you know Chris O'Donnell?
Well, he probably wouldn't remember me. We met once or twice years ago when he came out west to the West Coast. He wouldn't remember me now. We had a brief introduction, and I shook his hand, and we chatted for a few minutes. That was the extent of it.
Was this at the IHR?
No, it was in Northern California. It was in Sacramento.
Oh yeah, okay, great.
Yes,
Yeah.
Paul.
Are
Chris
you
and I go.
Are you safe, Charles?
Pardon?
Are you safe? We were hearing on the news there being a couple of really bad tornadoes down there in Louisiana.
I mean, it's so funny. You're like the 40th person to ask me today, and I'm uptown, and the tornado was the one tornado last night was in the 9th ward, which is like 5 miles away, and yeah, I'm perfectly fine. We had some gusty winds. Here, some of my trees and planters and pot plants blew over. I picked them up; they were fine. That's the end of the story.
Oh, that's great.
Oh,
but yes,
that's probably routine for you to deal with hurricanes and tropical storms coming through. It's
absolutely.
nothing.
And I mean, I oddly enough, the weather here is horrible, and I like it. I actually enjoy the vagaries of New Orleans weather. I got very bored in the nice weather of California.
Yeah.
Now, Paul, just so you'll know, it started off this evening with Chris telling, or Bill actually telling Chris that Chris made him the activist that he is, and I think this is a very interesting thing that Chris O'Donnell has had such an impact on William Daniel Johnson, and so I'm asking Chris basically to give us the same kind of insights again, and inspire us to do great things. And he's being very reticent about it and turning the question around.
Well, no, he did a very good job. He explained that there's no hope for us when he all slit our wrists. And so
no. There's always hope. There's hope individually. There's hope for families, maybe communities. I'm not sure about preserving nations or forms of government as they exist. If we're talking about saving America or Canada or Britain, I think that ship has sailed. At this point, but that's just my opinion. You may have differing views on that subject.
Yeah, well, no. So I think there's always hope. I mean, like someone said one time in the movement that we know what happened yesterday, we know what's happening today, but we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, and that gives us all hope. Something's gonna spark a change with us, and it's slowly coming. And frankly, and we've talked about this before, Paul and Charles and I, and this is my opinion. For all of his faults, I think the solution is the 47th president of the United States needs to be Donald Trump, because when he becomes president again, he's learned from the last time, and he is really going to clean the swamp out. So if he gets rid of the deep state people, and he calls in some people that's going to dismantle the CIA, dismantle the FBI, dismantle the Justice Department, do away with all these things, and just really wreak havoc on it, and that might cause the upheaval that we need to coalesce and affect change.
Do you see him?
I think the unexpected is something that's what we can't predict, and we might be lucky with that. And I have a feeling that if he wins in 2024, it'll be no more Mr. Nice Guy. I think he's learned a lot about the just insane treachery of the whatever you want to call them, the deep state or the elite. I'm not sure if I can quite compose myself. I've been weeping so much. I hear your former Secretary of State went to the big kahuna in the sky.
Albright.
Yeah.
Albright.
Who was into middle age before she discovered she was Jewish. Give me a break.
Yeah.
Well, so let me ask you this, Daniel. Do you see Trump actually running and mounting a re-election campaign? Do you think he will run again? And do you think he will have significant opposition within the Republican Party this time?
Okay, yes. I think he's already said he was golfing one time, and they said, "Oh, here is the 45th president of the United States." And he's turned and said, "And the 47th. So he said that. I think he's going to run again, and I think he's going to have huge opposition, but I think he's going to have huge support. And I think he's going to run, and I know he's getting old, and I think he's one of the few, probably the only president that has come out of office poorer than he went in. And so I think he realizes that his claim to fame isn't going to be his bloated and exaggerated fortune, which isn't very near as much as he claimed it to be, but he realizes he's got a lot of support. I think that his megalomania will want him to take, will really want to stomp and come down hard. And so I think, I know some of the people that are around him. I mean, I know people that are in his cabinet, and they're just as mainstream rhino Mitt Romney Republican types. And I thought, oh, if you get those people in again, there's going to be no
Did
hope.
you ever meet his daughter and son-in-law?
No, and I they wanted to get together with me, but I told them that I don't meet with Jews. But no, I didn't meet with him, and I think that he's got to sever that Jewish influence. But I think that he won't sever that influence, but I do think he will bring in some people that are hardcore deep state drainers. And see, as I look at it, when Chester A. Arthur established the Civil Service Commission, and then you had Tammany Hall, you had the spoil system. When people got into power, whether it was a senator, mostly I guess a mayor, a governor, or a president, they would just load it up with their people, and they'd kick out all the old people and put the new people in. And that was deemed to be bad because you always had a big turnover, and it was a spoil system, and that didn't work. So we did away with that, and we put the civil service system in, and you get hired for life. And so the deep state became the real control of this country. And I've seen this on a massive scale, and I've seen it on a minor scale. And I mentioned this before. I was the attorney for some people with right. There's a very important Los Angeles City monument, most important monument in LA, and they have a commission, and the commission is in charge of this monument, yet the commission has those people change every so often. The commission is the employer of the employees of the commission and of the lawyers from the commission. And I've sat there in these meetings where I've advocated on behalf of my clients, and the commissioners advocated on behalf of my clients, and the lawyers for the commission and the employees of the commission were insolent and refused to do what their bosses want, because they were permanent. They did what they wanted, and they could ignore the commissioners because the commissioners will change. And this is what's happened on the federal government on a grand scale. These employees run the government. So I will hope Donald Trump will get in there and he will try to drain the deep state. And one of my efforts, let me just say one more thing. One of my efforts before was I picked to see who was going to be the Secretary of Agriculture. And there was a guy from Texas who was the agriculture secretary there. And I thought, oh, he's really kind of extreme. So I contacted him and I wrote his acceptance speech in case he got nominated. But instead, Donald Trump nominated Perdue. And I thought I was going to get in there. And if we got the Agricultural Commission in there, we could do at the Department of Agriculture, we could begin to do away with all of the food stamps and the EBT stuff. And that would really wreck change. But Perdue got in there and we didn't do that. But so the point is that I think this time around, he's going to be a lot different and we might see some real change.
I mean, I've got to challenge that just from a totally practical standpoint. When he came in 16, basically on a shockwave, that he was the most exciting candidate. Without any doubt, he was the most eccentric candidate, and he really was able to show himself as something completely new and surprising. But he was able to put together a coalition, and I mean, let's face it, his Jewish connections are a key part of the reason he won. I mean, he paid them back. With some major symbolic acts, recognizing Jerusalem as moving the American embassy to Jerusalem. He was deeply committed to coalition building, and now that coalition has mostly fallen apart. How can he possibly be elected on a more radical? I mean, if I think he would. Biden's a disaster. I think everybody's going to agree with that. Biden is an unbelievable disaster, an embarrassment. He makes Jimmy Carter look fantastic, which I thought in my lifetime would never happen. And so how is he going to build a possible winning coalition, Bill?
Because there is nobody else out there, and when he holds rallies, there is still that hope. There are 30,000 people who show up for his rallies that are not advertised anywhere but on these little websites. And yeah, I agree with you that he did build a coalition, and I believe he's not going to jettison his Jewish support. But that notwithstanding, I think that the white populace can get a lot out of his presidency. More importantly, he will lead the way to a more divisive nationalist coming in and divide the country up, and then we can start breaking apart.
Yeah, can I say a few things here?
You're the guest honor.
First of all, a lot of this is wishful thinking. I think if Trump ditches the remnants of Reaganism and runs fully as a populist, nationalist populist, he could win very easily. You're talking about getting rid of food stamps. Well, I have news for you, Daniel. A lot of his constituency in places like West Virginia and the Rust Belt live on food stamps. The white, poor, and working class, and people in trailer parks that voted for Donald Trump. See, you think of food stamps as being only going to people in the inner cities. No, a lot of poor white people in the South and
but
in
if
the
you
Midwest
did away with if you did away with that program, they would have to get jobs, and who would not be hired? It would be the undesirables that would not be hired. It would be a good transition.
Yeah, jobs, but what jobs? Did Trump bring back any jobs to this country? He was talking about bringing back manufacturing, but you can't do that in one term or even in a few years. Manufacturing was exported and outsourced over 40 years starting with Ronnie Boy, or actually starting under Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter was the start of neoliberalism, when all these ideas came into vogue about deregulating business and exporting production to cheaper labor markets, taking advantage of that, lower taxes. It started with Milton Friedman's ideas became popular, starting with Carter. Carter deregulated airlines and the Bell system phone company. That could have been good or bad in the long run, but that started the process. It also occurred in Britain under Thatcher, and that brought us to where we are now, where there are large segments of the United States that are disaster areas, that are hollowed out, that have no jobs. Only jobs are at Walmart or
Right,
fast
right.
food
But
jobs.
see, you're looking at this from a business as usual perspective. What's going to happen is not going to be business as usual. I mean, we're going to see a dramatic change in the structure. This consumerism, this globalism is going to go away. And there will be people, there will be new jobs under a new system. And those that will find the jobs will be the white people. And they will get, they will earn enough to put on their table. They may not be able to go out and buy all of the junk from China anymore, but they will be able to eat. These other people that are not going to be able to eat, except from the government largesse, and we're going to see food prices rise exponentially because the cost of petroleum is going to make fertilizer so prohibitively expensive. So we're going to be looking at a new paradigm. We're going to be looking at a new system, we hope, and that do away with the government largesse and totally disrupt the system, and then you can have the building up. When we look back at how this country has transformed itself, there's always, you can see, look back with hindsight and say, yes, I can see how that happened. We don't know what's going to happen in the future, but if the great collapse happens, and a generation later they'll look back and says, I can see how it transpired. There's going to be a great collapse, I hope, after Trump gets elected.
Well, do you think Trump is on board with those policies?
No, he's on board with his megalomania, and
right.
He's on board with his leaving a lasting impression, and he's on his board with draining the swamp. And like Paul Fromm said, he's on board with not being a nice guy. And the result of that is going to be as cataclysmic as Truman dropping, Fat Boy on Hiroshima.
And let me tell you this, America will always support Israel. The idea that there will ever be some sort of government or political movement critical of Zionism that ever gets elected in this country is a pipe dream. Americans, and I talk to all kinds of people, and the people on the left are more pro-Palestinian than right-wingers are, for obvious reasons. But most Americans support Israel emotionally and politically, and that's going to continue to be the case. I mean, whether there's a Zionist lobby or not, there's strong support for Israel, and I think that's going to continue until this country collapses. I don't see that ever changing, this idea, we're going to get people that put America first, and they're going to get in office, and they're going to clean out the State Department and all these things, and stop foreign aid and adopt a neutral, even-handed policy in the Middle East. I don't see that happening at all. But let me just say this really quick here. What you're talking about, I mean, that requires Donald Trump to be a lot smarter and more shrewd than he actually is. So I don't know. I share your hope that it develops something. I always looked at the Trump movement as maybe a stepping stone to something better in the future, and I still have that hope. I'm hoping it's not a forlorn hope, but I still hang on to that thread of hope there.
That's what I think. I think we cannot depend on Donald Trump to support us willingly, but we can depend on Donald Trump for being such a counter to the establishment that it could throw everything into disarray, and then the pieces could be picked up. I think that, of course, every movement, everything I've been involved in, nothing has worked. I've been wrong on everything. So with that grain of salt, I think that Donald Trump can be the impetus for the cataclysmic change that we need, and someone coming along after him to pick up the pieces.
Paul, you studied with Marshall McLuhan, is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
So basically what Trump is is some sort of media phenomenon, right? I mean, he has made himself he has made himself a message. But what do you think that message is? Bill is sort of creating a really interesting fantasy here. I hope it's a fantasy that can come true, but it seems like a fantasy at this moment that basically it's not that Trump is on our side, it's that unconsciously he is a force of nature or a force of symbolic change. How do you perceive that?
Well, he has in many ways mastered the media, and to such an extent that he knows that most of the fake news media are incorrigible. So he's a genius at working around it. And that's what Bill said is just, this is a phenomenon that I don't think the elite fully understood. The fact that on 36 hours notice, and much of it just to social networks, he can fill a stadium in a small town in Texas or Louisiana or Iowa with 20,000 people. Well, who else could do that? I mean, or if somebody could do it, it would be the result of months and months of promotion and beating the bushes and so on. He has a command of the alternative media, and that's one of the reasons that he got banned from Twitter, and I think he's banned from Facebook and so on. But and he's also, I haven't heard much new about this. I mean, many details, but he has started his own media company with former, I think, Devin Nunes as the CEO. And I think he will be using that means of communication. Now, as to what he is really, I think he's a populist at heart with a lot of good instincts and some bad ones, but good instincts. He knows that there's a treacherous, poisonous elite that has seriously betrayed America and the American dream, and that in itself is a degree of wisdom. I think many conservatives I've met in the United States, and to say nothing of here, still really believe that if we just articulated the right economic policy and the right tax cut or whatever, all would be well. And as we make sure we don't hang out with extremists or anything, we'll sort of get our moment in the sun. Even if that were true, that we got our moment in the sun, the people with that lack of vision aren't going to do anything with it. He at least was prepared to say the unsayable, build a wall. This would be the problem of illegal immigration had bedeviled both the conservative movement and the liberals weren't bedeviled by it. They welcomed it for 20 years. I mean, I've watched it in American politics, and it wasn't until Trump came along that the very practical alternative was put out there. Okay, all this trash is coming in. Stop them. Build a wall. Now, he wasn't completely successful, but he certainly massively discouraged the invasion. I mean, we will never be entirely happy with any even semi-mainstream politician. But I agree with Bill. If I were saying if today was 4 years from now, yes, I think Trump will run. I don't think anybody at this point in the Republican Party can mount a credible challenge. Some will challenge him, but I can't see Mitt Romney or any of the rhinos being affected. Anything can change. I mean, he might lose his base support in the next 2 or 3 years. But if it were today, I'd say he would run, and if it were today, I think he would pull off a victory like Nixon had in 72. Sleepy Joe would be lucky to keep 2 states.
Okay, but I think
Nixon's victory in 72 was largely because Wallace was not the Democratic candidate.
And also the Democrats ran
McGovern.
yes, a hopeless person, and of course, with some dirty tricks, he was made to look even more hopeless. But yeah, that type of thing occurs once in a generation. But I think if again going with
But-
just the present,
So-
Trump would win handily.
So let me add a few things here to this discussion. So let's be clear. Trump is no quote unquote conservative of any kind. He's running. He would have run under the Democratic Party if he could have done so, as well as the Republican Party. The Republican Party was an easier vehicle for him to run under. Trump has been friends personally with the Clintons and with many other establishment Democrats. Trump is not a social conservative. He's been supportive of gay marriage and abortion rights. So Trump's power is populism, connecting to the whites mainly, and even a lot of Hispanics like Trump. I've met them out here. A lot of Hispanics, a lot of other people like Trump and supported him, not just the white working class, but that's who he connected with and who became his base, especially in what they refer to as flyover country. And that's his power, in my opinion, his advantage over his potential rivals in the party.
Right, but what you need to remember, Chris, is that you are the one that told me we are not conservatives. We should not be conservatives. Conservatives are our enemies. You're the one that woke me up to that 40 years ago.
Yes, they are. But what amazes me, I'm going to say this. So the utter defeat of social conservatism. Remember, in the 80s, Jerry Falwell's movement was still a force to be reckoned with in the Republican Party. The evangelicals in the South and the Midwest, they had the moral majority. Think of what has just changed. Could anyone have imagined 30 or 40 years ago there'd be gay marriage in all 50 states, that it would be all right for children to be taught that they can transition, quote unquote, to the other sex if they
If
felt
we
like
had
doing
predicted
so.
that 30 years ago, we'd be denounced as delusional or conspiracy freaks, and now it's reality.
But that is my point exactly, because what we've got on one level, we've got the Donald Trump out there, and we've got on the other level the incredible undermining of our society, the nonstop anti-white propaganda, the nonstop promotion of transgenderism, and all of those things that just take away from the fabric of society. Those two components will come together to create this explosion that will be reminiscent of Hiroshima. That's what I think.
Well, I hope you're right. I have I don't want to rain on your parade. I really do hope that you turn out to be correct.
That's the only thing that I can see. At the very beginning of this discussion, Charles says, well, what is there to do? And that is my scenario right now. And that's why I'm moving in my efforts to position myself for that possibility.
Let me ask this. What do we do all personally within our local communities? Do we talk to our neighbors, to other people, to friends, to colleagues? Even on a cautious, neutral level, what do we do? Sure, it's good to connect with people on social media hundreds or thousands miles away or in other countries. What do we do locally? Now, I'll tell you where I live. I'm pretty isolated in my area where I live. I am in a very blue, progressive part of the West Coast. It couldn't get as more blue or progressive than you could imagine. But surprisingly, I do meet people here and there who have similar sentiments, and cautiously I've reached out to them and have formed connections. But it's very oppressive. You have to be very careful what you say, how you say things, because you say the wrong thing, or use the wrong inflection and talking about a particular subject, and you'll get pummeled, you know,
Well,
verbally by people.
when I first started this movement, I hired an employee by the name of Arch Edwards, and he told me
I
he
remember
told
him.
yeah, he told me you can't go by your name. You got to use a pseudonym. So that's why I went by my middle name. That's why you know me as Daniel, because I listened to him, and I tried to, for a while, I tried to keep things separate, and then that didn't work out for a few years. And finally I said, no, I'm just going to be out and open. Everything I do, I'm a white nationalist. I'm proud of it. I'm going to let people know. And I've done that for 35 years. And I'm one of the few people I know that has helped my business. But of course, I represent mostly Japanese corporations, and they all want to get on my good side when they found out my politics, and so they give me more business. But I think that's what I have decided to do. I am out front because there's nothing to be ashamed of. There's nothing to hide. And what I do is right. I treat everybody with respect. I don't discriminate against everybody. I treat them fairly. On a micro level, I do what I'm supposed to do according to the law and good social media, and what Dale Carnegie would tell you to do. The changes that I want are on a macro level. I want a separate white ethno-state or states. And so I'm advocate that on a broader level, and I let everybody know that. And I can tell you that I have influenced people. I can probably about three or four people I've influenced over 40 years. So I've had some influence, but it'll work out. We're influencing more and more if we come out in the open.
I'll tell you, I've been involved with elements of the left. I mean, as far as like on certain issues, like during the Iraq War, I was very active with the anti-war movement against intervention in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I was, I had to be pretty low key and keep everything quiet, about some of my sentiments, but quietly with a few people, I managed to influence them in the right direction politically and culturally, shall we say, towards a better way of thinking about certain issues. So I pride myself on that,
I've been involved in the end of lockdown protests in Canada since late March of 2020. And it's a very unusual coalition or coming together of people. Some people who might have voted for the Green Party, some people you might may not be. I don't mean this sarcastically, but kind of granola eating, sort of alternative health type, sort of soft leftists. And libertarians and populists, and there's an interesting mix because it's all about freedom. There isn't really one leader. There have been leaders that have emerged, but there isn't. It's not a top-down movement, and the number of ideas that would have been only among ourselves more or less. 5-10 years ago are out there. Like some guy in his 20s came up to me at a protest a couple of weeks ago when we were all freezing our toes off and said, "Do you know about the protocols?" You mean, I said, "You mean the stupid government regulations?" "No," he said, "the protocols of the elders of Zion." I said, yeah, I do. And the enemy, certainly the professional, like the Canadian Anti-Hate Network, is vaguely aware of how much these ideas, many of the so-called conspiracy ideas and things like that have spread among all these new people. Now, I'm not saying every one of these people would necessarily totally agree, but it's interesting that that this unusual crisis has in many ways educated a lot of people, and then on a macro level, educated a lot of people to at least now know you can't trust the lying media, and actually you can't trust the government, and you really can't trust the banks, because we went through that short Emergency Measures Act up here, where the banks were willingly freezing or seizing accounts of people that they thought had been involved in these protests, or the government told them. It was all very chaotic, but people suddenly realized, what, I can't trust the bank. And there have been parliamentary hearings about this in the past couple of weeks. And apparently there was a run on the banks and run on credit unions. All sorts of people quickly got it. My money isn't safe. Even people who hadn't really been very much involved in these protests. And people got a good old scare and withdrew their money. It's Bob Dylan said it, and I'm no great fan of his, but the times they are changing.
May I ask Paul Fromm a question related to the banks in Canada? I understand that some of the people that were behind this truckers convoy had their bank accounts, all their bank accounts frozen and seized at the behest of the federal government of Canada. Has that been resolved favorably for these people?
I don't
or
know.
not?
First of all, yes, that is true. Secondly, there's a class action suit, which is very difficult in Canada, but the one is being launched, and the people doing that got a compliant judge to freeze the accounts of a number of people whom the class action suit are suing for having caused them allegedly all sorts of pain and grief and financial damage with the truckers' protests that lasted a couple of weeks in downtown Ottawa. So at least those bank accounts are still frozen. We haven't heard about other ones, but I mean, that was for many Canadians, and I suspect for Americans too, it would be a complete shock to find out that your money is not safe in the bank, or at least safe from a government order just stealing it. And that's what happened with the GoFundMe, raised $10 million in about 15 days. Now, to put that, you've got to put that in a Canadian context. We're 1/9 your size in terms of population. All major federal parties, all 5 of them, spent less than $10 million in last September's election. This group of, grassroots, mostly populist, mostly middle class, working class people raised $10 million just through the GoFundMe in 15 days. This is phenomenal. And the government and the police in Ottawa leaned on GoFundMe, and they basically stole the money. Well, okay, they refunded it to the donors, but in my opinion, that's stealing it. The donors gave it to the truckers never got it. And this came as a huge shock to people. And in many ways, it's good because there's a real lack of trust, and that's what we need. It's all the complacent people who go along nodding their head at whatever the government or the media says that makes it so difficult for us. And I think that the times are changing.
Let me ask you another question briefly, real quick here. It goes to the psychology of Anglo-Canadians, which I feel have even less of an identity, a secure identity, than Americans do, because they lost that British connection, that connection with the mother country, and they're not quite American, but they don't really have a fully formed identity. Certainly not like the French in Quebec. And are there any grumblings at the grassroots level about immigration, all this mass immigration and all these changes in Canada over the last 30 or 40 years? It just seems that, I mean, Americans are pretty bad, but it seems like the average Canadian is just so mild-mannered and complacent about all these things going on. Do you see any hope for Anglo-Canada?
Well, the polls, and I love to study the polls, show a very substantial opposition, and there always has been. There never was mass support for. We want to make this a diverse country. That was always an elitist slogan. It was not a grassroots demand. We're just so damn bored being European and Anglo-Saxon, we just have to let in Jamaica and part of Africa and China, but no, that it was never that type of thing. There are two problems. Number one is until very recently, there's been no leadership. The so-called Conservative Party, while it was always labeled as crypto racist, etc., that never did a damn thing. In fact, under President Premier Harper, the numbers were increased. Even in the middle of the 2008-2009 economic debacle, one of his proudest boasts is, I kept those numbers up. Yeah, that was a great slap in the face to 11% of Canadians who are unemployed. So there's, until very recently, with the People's Party and Maxime Bernier, there's been no political leadership. So the people who are unhappy really didn't have any place to go. Secondly, of course, more even than in the United States, basic criticism of immigration appears nowhere in the fake news media. I mean, unless you're criticizing it from the left, we ought to do more. We ought to make it easier. But opposition, even just to the numbers, is hardly ever heard. And certainly on a racial basis, I could show you the 5 articles that have appeared in the last 20 years in a mainstream paper that even gingerly said, well, maybe this business of 85% of the intake being from the third world, maybe this mightn't be the best idea. So the sentiments of the dispossessed European majority don't very seldom find an outlet until the advent of the internet, and that is changing. But it was a clever move that it became the sort of topic respectable people can't talk about in politics or in the media.
Because, as I'll tell you, I've known my share of Canadians, and they complain bitterly about the French in Quebec and bilingual labels on products in the stores. Oh, do they complain about that? But they don't say a damn thing about all this mass third world immigration. They say nothing about that. Well, it's amazing to me.
Not to challenge you, but is your knowledge current?
Well, it goes back maybe a couple of decades, so it's not
20, 30 years ago. Yes, there was an awful lot of resentment because there was a lot of bilingualism imposed in federal institutions. A lot of people were didn't qualify to get a promotion or even sometimes to get a job if they weren't bilingual, and those jobs went mostly to people from Quebec or from sort of the Ottawa area of Ontario. Yeah, the complaining about bilingualism in the French, was much stronger 20, 30 years ago. I hardly ever hear that today. People, well, suddenly a person who speaks French doesn't seem quite so bad when the alternative is somebody with a bone in his nose or a turban on his head.
I think your greatest worry should be from Hong Kong and China. I mean, that's just uncontrollable. And they've always had their eyes set on the West, on British Columbia, Vancouver, which they've now successfully colonized. And
well, they actually have their eyes set on North America. And it has taken us a very long time. Well, there's still a very substantial pro-Chinese force among business people and the Ottawa elite. I think people are far more clued in, at least in my limited experience in Japan, to the threat. I mean, the big international threat to North America is going to come from China. Russia is a minor player, in my opinion.
Paul was talking about the sort of absence of any political opposition, and we've had occasion to mention George Wallace and his movement, but the last real glimmer of hope that I saw in the United States we haven't, I don't think we've ever talked about, and two Californians on the show, Pete Wilson. What happened to Pete Wilson and the California resistance to Mexican immigration? Because in the 1980s and 90s, he was actually proposing repealing the 14th Amendment, birthright citizenship. What exactly happened to that?
I believe it was a federal judge who ruled it, or it might have been Daniel may know better than I do at the moment. Ruled it unconstitutional, so gutted it. It was DOA, even though 60% of the voters passed it, it passed by a 60% to 40 majority.
Well, I mean, you could have a repeal of the 14th Amendment would have had to have been federal. So, I mean, I guess the state can't nullify the 14th Amendment. But
well, I'm not sure.
I'm asking a political question. Why did Pete Wilson fail? Why did that? He was elected senator and then he died, basically.
Because demographics changed rapidly in California. The old white Republicans in places like Orange County, enclaves like that, all died or moved out of California over the last quarter century, and California has changed politically. Orange County used to be called the Orange Curtain, was a staunch bastion of conservatism, and the Republican Party. Bob Dorn and Dana Rohrabacher, the John Birch Society was strong there decades ago. Now it's all represented by Hispanic Democrats mainly. So that's what happened. Demographics changed. The voting population became less white and less conservative over the decades. In my opinion. Daniel may have a different take on it.
No, I concur.
And there was nothing he could do there was just nothing that could be done to stop it.
Yeah.
And the white people of California couldn't do anything.
Well, let's keep this in mind. The last 25 years, okay, California voters, California is the land of fruits and nuts and a bunch of wacko leftists. Let me tell you something. California voted to strip illegal aliens of social services in I believe it was 1994, or it might have been 96. I can't remember now. Also voted to end affirmative action programs, and I believe in 2008 voted against same-sex marriage, against adopting same-sex marriage. And guess what happened? All these Democratic results were thrown out by the courts as unconstitutional. So we're not going to vote our way out of this mess. I'm telling you now. That's my view.
Yeah, it shows that, I guess, the white population has a different perspective than other people's do. It's like I ended up putting cows on my property, but I was thinking about raising venison, putting deer in there. So I did the research on putting in deer. The only deer you can put in and you can only farm is called fallow deer. They're the one with the palmated antlers. And you have to have 10-foot high fences. You've got to keep them enclosed, because if they got out in the population, they would displace the mule deer and the white-tailed deer because they're so aggressive. So different species have different characteristics. And the white people are the most welcoming and inviting, and the other people are not. And that's why we're the architect of our own destruction. I would think.
I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt you. Let me tell you something. Proposition 8 in 2008, which rejected same-sex marriage in California, the white electorate voted overwhelmingly against it, I believe by 60% or over. Hispanics and blacks voted for it.
Right, and that shows that the white people have this welcoming, all-inclusive attitude that we have to change, and that's one proof of it. I mean, there are aspects of me that, like, I would like to go up to an Antifa rally and say, hey, I think like you do. We both want change. I want change too. And if I said that, they would club me with a bike lock. But if we had an Antifa person come to a white national meeting, says, hey, we differ view on what the change needs to be, but we both want change, the white nationalists would embrace him. I mean, I used to tour, I toured with Robert Brock, and we went to a Ku Klux Klan rally, and he's a black man. And when he was invited to speak there, and everybody that spoke were very cordial and polite. They didn't say anything bad about any people. They were welcoming him as much as they could. And he felt so welcome. And when they gave us the speech, he was just given a standing ovation, and he was really liked, because that's the way the white people acted. Then on that same trip, we went to Oakland, and we got picked up by a black nationalist who had an old beat up car, and he had an African flag with an African spear on the back, and he's wearing one of those rainbow hats that figured African colors. And I get in the back seat, and the driver turns to Brock and says, what are you doing with this white boy? We need to take him out and kill him. And I go, ha ha. Robert Brock turned to me and says, Johnson, don't say a word. So I was kept quiet the whole time. We get into this meeting of all these black nationalists, and I'm sitting in the back, and they spent the whole hour and a half telling how they should kill me and kill all white people. And so that's what we're doing. I got out of there. I think, oh gee, I'm never doing this again. But the white people are open and receptive. The other people don't. So we got to change that attitude.
Well, no, I'd say the electorate in California, even among Republicans, are overwhelmingly socially liberal. They support abortion, legal abortion, same-sex marriage, or they're more sympathetic to it than, say, the conservative electorate would be in the South or the Midwest, at least up to this day. Let me tell you an interesting story really quick here. I once attended a Nation of Islam rally in Los Angeles. I was one of a handful of whites allowed inside. There were 15 to 20,000 blacks, and it was like a black Nuremberg rally. Farrakhan, whatever you think of his views, Louis Farrakhan, he is one of the most effective public orators I've ever seen, black or white, in the last 40 years in this country. And he had the blacks on their feet, and I was treated very friendly and cordially, and not, given dirty looks. Or I was with one other gentleman, a white gentleman, and we were treated very well. No hostility, no feeling of awkwardness. So why are you here? It was very strange experience.
Do you think that he was that good of a speaker, or was it because his audience was that good of an audience? Because I've listened to Donald Trump speeches, and they just love what he says, and I think he's a lousy speaker.
I think all effective speakers can connect with their audience and tell people what they want to hear, or bring out their inner whatever desires or longings they may have inside, or connect with them psychologically. And Farrakhan knows his people and what triggers them, and how to elicit a response out of them. He's a master at it. I only wish there were white leaders or spokesmen as effective as Farrakhan. There aren't, though, too many of them.
Yeah. Okay, well, this has been an interesting discussion.
It has, and I want to get Chris back, and I've got to go too. But Chris, thank you so much for joining us. Paul, Seed Sue, it's always good to see you, Seed Sue, especially since it rhymes. But anyhow, good night, everybody, and let's do this again, because this is very interesting exercise.